Paul, welcome back to Propagandist. We're back with more RWBY Volume 4 and all that. Now, as you can tell from the title of this video, we're taking a momentary, diversion from the series itself to go and watch the outstanding World of Remnant episode. So, there's 5 of them in total on this Volume 4 DVD copy of mine. So, Kingdoms, Between Kingdoms, I think there's one on the Faunus, Schnee Dust Company, and the Great WoR as well. So, I think, as far as I'm aware, once we've watched these 5, that'll be it for World of Remnant. We'll have basically watched all of them, I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, unless there is, or any other ones out there somewhere that I'm just not aware of, which I'm sure people can probably give me a reminder of in the comments and all that. So we're going to get a bit more lore, backstory about the World of Remnant, which is always good, just for filling in some of the blanks that I sometimes have in my own mind. Because, I may be a RWBY fan and all that, but there's still a lot about the underlying premise and story, the setting, things like that of this franchise that, sometimes even watching this retrospective, sorry, not watching this retrospective, doing this retrospective series, still there's bits of information that come to me which I realise I was not aware of previously. So, we'll see if there's anything particularly new that I'm not already aware of as we watch these 5. There may be stuff, who knows, we'll see. Another thing in the meantime though, before we get to the actual reaction itself, so as I want to record this, it is a Saturday in late March, and basically in the next sort of week or two, my Easter leave from work is going to be kicking in. Basically, Easter will be upon us, and that means a couple of weeks where I will be off from work. And probably for several of those days, like I do over Christmas and summer periods, for example, I'll probably be travelling back up to the north of England to visit friends and family and all that. Meaning there's probably going to be maybe about a week or so where I'll be away from my computer, not able to do recordings, that kind of thing. So, you know the drill. I've talked about this kind of thing before when, it was the run up to Christmas, for example, in 2025. But obviously, I have to sometimes pre-record a bit of material whenever there's a holiday or something like that coming up where I'm going to be away from my computer for a bit and thus not in a position to do any recording. So yeah, I'm actually planning on recording this episode today, then maybe tomorrow recording perhaps another RWBY episode, just so that way I have sufficient content to keep me going over through the Easter leave period. So that way when I eventually get back to my flat after I visited friends and family back up north, I can then, be assured that I have at least one pre-recorded episode that can go out on the next Sunday, so that way I can make sure I get more recorded in the meantime. So that's the plan, anyway, ladies and gentlemen. That's just something to be aware of and all that. So, like I say, because obviously it's pre-recorded, I won't have seen your comments just yet. I mean, the truth is, I've actually been really good for pre-recording stuff in advance of when it needs to go out, and having a little bit pre-recorded in advance, just in case there's ever a weekend when I'm not able to record another episode of this. So, I always tend to, when the most recent episode that you basically see on the channel usually is not the one that I last recorded. Usually I'll have also recorded the next 2 episodes-ish. In advance, just to give you a bit of a behind the scenes glance and all that. So that's just what I wanted to say right there. So other than that, I haven't really got anything else I want to talk about in this preamble, so I suppose we'll just get to the World of Remnant episodes themselves. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, here we are. We're on the main menu screen where the World of Remnant stuff is kept. I think we'll just sort of play all then, in that case. 3, 2, 1, go. Who's going to be narrating this one? Is it Ozpin as usual? Because I could have sworn Crow's VA back in the day recorded a few of these, but who knows. Kingdoms. I guess we're going to go through each one individually.
Well, school's definitely out.
Crow,
let's see if we can't all learn a little something. Welcome to the World of Remnant. Not the best place to live, but depending on where you're staying, it can get a little easier. You've got towns and villages that pop up as fast as they fall. The Faunus have menagerie, but the sweet spots are Vale, Mistral, Atlas, and Vacuo. the four kingdoms of the modern era.
And that one landmass up
Each
there that we don't know what it is.
its own little way.
But possibly where Salem
Let's
is.
talk about Vale. In the grand scheme of things, Vale's pretty well guarded. It rests on the northeastern end of the world's largest continent, Faunus. Like most successful kingdoms, Vale's survival over the years can mostly be attributed to prime real estate. Its front is protected by steep mountains, and its back is against waters too shallow for any real threat to pop out of. Not to say I haven't heard some crazy fish stories. Aside from the main city, which the kingdom's named after, the Vale territory also extends to several neighboring cities farther along the northwest coastline, as well as a
We've never
small
seen
island
these, have we?
patch. Nice
These
place
neighboring
to raise a
cities.
family, if you're into that sort of thing. Of course, all attempts to extend the kingdom's reach past the mountains and farther into the mainland have been colossal.
Sorry, I'm just going to pause there. Yeah, saying, like, it's a shame we never really got to see more of the Kingdom of Vale in the early volumes, because, you know, this mentioning that there are other cities in there is interesting, because you've got the main city itself where, you know, volumes 1 through 3 very much take place. But then technically, you know, the Kingdom of Vale is not just that one city, it extends quite far over this landmass. It's also a shame that, you know, in volumes 4 and 5 with, well, not so much 5, but volume 4 in particular with Yang, we didn't really get to see more of Patch either. But, you know, what reason would there be to show more of it? I guess, you know, you can't just sort of shoehorn in showing more and more of the geography of these fictitious kingdoms just for the hell of it. You know, there's got to be a story purpose for showing them and all that. But, you know, good to know that technically these aren't the only cities out there. There are other locations as well, part of these kingdoms. 3, 2, 1, resume.
But, like I said, in the grand scheme of things, Vale ain't half bad. Regular climate, natural barriers, and some serious border defenses means the citizens of Vale can spend less time worrying about survival and more time just living their lives. Of course, with the fall of Beacon, everyone's a little more worried these days. And they should be.
So Vale itself has not actually fallen then, but people I think were clear on that in the comments. It was just a thing in one of the past episodes that got me a bit confused.
Right.
So you're drinking as well, Crow? Alcohol probably, but tea here for myself.
Second largest landmass on it. That's where you'll find the kingdom of Mistral. Of the 4 kingdoms, Mistral has the most controlled territory, meaning you'll find a wider variety of ecosystems and lifestyles. Trust me, this place is something for everyone, for better or worse. The high society folks of Mistral are known worldwide for their contributions to fashion, architecture, theater, all the things that make the world pretty and tolerable. But its lower class has got a fame of its own. Mistral's home to the biggest black market on the planet. Need something that's hard to find? Got someone that's hard to kill? They can help. Provided you've got the end.
I mean, we saw this very much in volume 6
one common thread that links
with Miss
all
Muffet or whatever she was
together,
called.
And that's their respect for nature, particularly the sea and the sky. The natural resources and geography of the area impacted Mistral's culture and technology in a big way. Its first settlers found shelter high up in the wind-carved cliffs, and as their population grew, so did their ability to utilize the land to its fullest potential. A real bunch of forward thinkers. Of course, the bigger the kingdom.
We'll see Mistral, of course, once we get to the end of this volume.
There's a reason traders and thieves flock.
Including those cliffside
Main
cities.
cities right under the council's eye, sure, but places like Windpath and Kuchinashi start to get a little farther out of sight. There's plenty of places to hide in Mistral.
So where was Argus within that? Because obviously it must be on the
That's why
same
you gotta
landmass.
know where to look.
It's probably on that northern peninsula, maybe? Or in sort of the, you know, the snowy mountain area, which you see at the start of, obviously, Volume 6 and all that. Right, Atlas.
I suppose it's time we talked about the fine people at the top of the world. Atlas is Remnant's youngest and arguably most successful kingdom. but it's a bit of a special case. See, before the Great War, there was no Atlas. There was Mantle. At some point in time, a group of settlers were crazy enough to venture out into the northernmost continent of Solitas. I guess when you're that desperate, a frozen hunk of rock doesn't seem like such a bad place to call home. As a matter of fact, the harsh weather conditions proved to be just as useful as the mountain ranges when it came to keeping the creatures of Grim at bay. But it also kept the people of Mantle from flourishing. Humanity's got a neat trick up its sleeve, though. Whenever we're faced with a problem, our inclination is to find a solution. The cold climate of Solitas forced its settlers to adapt. They developed a more advanced technology, and they did it faster than the rest of the world. Because they had to survive.
Crisis is a great motivator.
That really kicked things off.
Well, hardship, rather, in this case, but
dust application,
you know what I mean?
Weaponry allowed Mantle to expand. More and more territory was set aside for dust mining and research. The territory beside the kingdom's combat school, Alcius, was the most opportune area to construct a new R&D facility. But by the time things were all said and done, it would be much, much more. Alcius was reopened as Atlas after the Great War to house many of the warriors now seeking guidance in an effort to give back to the citizens. Mantle applied all sorts of new dust techniques and technologies it had used in the war to beef up the Academy's campus. The school grounds expanded faster than they could have imagined, and even helped to better secure the surrounding areas. It wasn't long before the kingdom's military moved in, then the labs and research facilities, and eventually even residential areas started popping up. In time, it became apparent that the city of Mantle was living in Atlas' shadow. So the decision was made to move the kingdom's capital. Mantle was old news, and the kingdom of Atlas was born. A golden age of prosperity, they called it. But those left behind in Mantle will probably tell you that it was the coldest winter they ever knew.
Yeah, just going to pause there on a black screen, of course. So it's interesting because, you know, you've got Mantle, you've got Atlas, the two cities in close proximity to one another. But it makes me wonder, like, how many other settlements there actually are on that continent. Because, of course, you know, what we just saw with Vale and Mistral is that, you know, you have the main cities, but then you have plenty of other outlying cities and settlements and places like that. So, you know, with Vale you had Patch and other smaller cities. But then you had Mistral, and it mentioned a couple of other towns, sort of, you know, satellite towns in orbit around that, the main city itself. Didn't really see that with Atlas so much, and, you know, given Atlas is supposed to be this kind of, you know, situated on this frozen continent, I suppose that is an interesting question about how many other settlements you actually do have in a landmass like that, where I would imagine probably a lot of it is very remote and sparsely populated, but yeah. Okay, 3, 2, 1, resume. Still got quite a few to go. Vacuo now, and that'll be the final of these kingdoms, and then we'll get onto the Beyond Kingdoms one.
Now, if there's one kingdom that's had it harder than the people of Mantle, it's Vacuo, the last of the 4 great kingdoms.
The one we have not seen yet in RWBY.
The western end of Faunus is a barren and desolate wasteland. But long ago, before man went and ruined everything, it was a paradise. In the center of the vast desert was an oasis unlike anything you'd ever seen. A jungle bursting with natural resources, geographical defenses, and the world's largest recorded deposit of dust. Nomads that survived the journey across the scorching sands settled down in this little hidden gem, and over time the kingdom of Vacuo thrived. Unfortunately, comfort breeds weakness. While the rest of Remnant had to learn and adapt in order to survive, Vacuo's ancient society kicked back and lived a life of complacency. But when other, more developed kingdoms set their eyes on everything Vacuo had to offer, its citizens couldn't do anything to stop them from taking it. Years of human conflict, unrestricted mining, and ecological disasters have changed Vacuo. The paradise that was once there is practically indistinguishable from the surrounding deserts. Citizens live in makeshift homes, uprooting and traveling frequently in response to the fleeting resources and occasional attacks from the creatures of Grimm. After the Great War, a formal government was finally established. But by that point, the folks living in Vacuo didn't much care to uphold its laws, making Shade Academy the only real source of order in the kingdom. But order isn't everything. Vacuo may not be as prim and proper as the other three kingdoms, but it's still standing. And the people there have a mutual respect for one another. See, there's really only one unspoken rule in Vacuo. If you can survive here, then you're welcome here. So, there you have it.
See that guy there doing his finger guns?
Atlas and Vacuo. You know, Oz would always say that the four kingdoms were a representation of what mankind is capable of when working together. Ever the optimist. We sure could use him now.
Yeah, so I'm just going to pause for a moment there and say, I suppose, I don't know if that's well, if what it said towards the end there is anything to go by, there's only one real rule that governs life in Vacuo. Is the implication there that this sort of reality is that on a de facto level, because what it showed there was a bunch of human figures, a bunch of Faunus figures actually getting along, seemingly. So are we saying that Vacuo actually is the one kingdom that in practice probably has the highest levels of de facto equality between the two groups? That's the way I just interpreted what that was trying to suggest there. Okay, interesting. Also, I like the design of Shade Academy being this kind of ziggurat structure. Yeah, because obviously, you know, when you look at each of the kingdoms, you can definitely see how there's a bit of inspiration from real life, real world cultures going on in them. You know, like Vale probably has more of like a sort of European kind of design in some of its architecture, things like that. Whereas obviously Mistral, you know, you're getting into something that's much more East Asian inspired. Atlas, of course, you know, probably is quite heavily inspired, well, given that it's obviously a very technologically sophisticated state, is probably sort of based on the US, I would imagine, to a degree. And then obviously Vacuo has sort of that interesting combination, because like some of the buildings and silhouettes that we saw of the skyline, the architecture just then, some of that looked like slightly more Middle Eastern themed buildings with like domes and things like that. But then you have the ziggurat of shade, which possibly is a bit more akin maybe to sort of certain Mesoamerican cultural architectural designs. You know, like how the Mayans, for example, used to build those sort of ziggurat-like pyramids. So maybe there's a bit of a fusion going on there. But yeah. It is a shame that we haven't seen Vacuo yet, but obviously if, you know, we get volumes 10 through 12 at any point, they will be set there. Because obviously, you know, I've said this before, when you look at RWBY as a whole, all of the different volumes, you know, each arc very much spans 3 volumes each in the story. So, you know, you have the Vale arc in the first 3 volumes, the Mistral arc in the next 3, Atlas arc in volumes 7 through 9 and all that. Though obviously that was a bit of a funny one, because obviously volume 9 technically is not in Atlas at all. It's in a completely different world and all that. Okay, right, World of Remnant, Beyond Kingdoms, 3, 2, 1, resume. So is this about, between kingdoms, sorry, not beyond kingdoms. So is this about little towns outside?
So, now you know more about the kingdoms, but what's between the big cities? Alright, the easy answer is Rim. There's no reason to beat around the bush. They're out there, and it probably won't go well if you run into one. That's okay, because you're a huntsman. Or huntress. And you've trained at one of the major academies, so you're probably fine. Just don't get yourself overrun by a pack of them. Now, after a long day of killing Grimm and saving the world, you're going to probably want to stop at a small town inn. Small villages dot the land between the major cities. You might ask, with the wilderness being so dangerous, why not just live in the big cities? Well, that life isn't meant for everyone. These small towns are founded by people that have a problem with the kingdoms, or don't want to deal with the kingdom's problems, or maybe just enjoy the simpler life and would rather take their chances in the wild than in a kingdom. It goes about as well as you'd think. If the founders are smart, then there's a good chance these towns can survive for the same reason the kingdoms continue to. Natural barriers, strong defenses, and stubborn citizens.
But if they're not smart, like that one dude Bartleby with Brunswick Farms, then they basically fall apart, is where it's probably going right here. So, no, that was just my first thought. I'm having my Volume 6 flashback and all that. 3, 2, 1, resume.
If you don't have at least a few of those, then the chances of a town lasting more than a year isn't great. Unfortunately, it's not just the Grim running around ruining towns. Wandering bandits are another threat. These groups of usually fairly skilled fighters travel the lands, never settling in one place. They often prey on convoys, sending goods between kingdoms. That's not all. These raiders will often wait for a town to be at its weakest, maybe after a Grim attack or while its fighters are out hunting, before finally moving in at night and striking. Bunch of jerks. The worst part is, if the Grim hadn't attacked before, you'd better be damn sure they will now. And you can't exactly have bandits raid your town without at least a few negative emotions. This is also why bandits never stay in the towns they conquer. With attitudes like the ones they have, Grim tend to be pretty interested in them as well. As long as they keep moving, they've got a better chance of survival. Besides these small towns, the areas between kingdoms really depend on the continent. Harsh deserts, icy tundras, lush forests, you name it. At this point, pretty much every inch of Remnant has been mapped out. Although there are some areas that no one's gone into and come out alive.
Such as that one in the northwest?
Of course. Somewhere out there is where she is.
Possibly in that northwest corner. Keep saying that, because it's the one landmass that we don't seem to know anything about in RWBY. Okay, Faunus time. Tell us about the Faunus Crow.
You know, most of us spend a lot of time talking about mankind versus Grim, but technically there is a third party in the mix, the Faunus. In case you're not in the know, the Faunus are a species on Remnant that appear to be human in just about every way but one. Each Faunus has a single animalistic trait, some more apparent than others. Ram horns, tiger claws, cat ears. I swear, on my huntsman's license, I once saw a guy regrow his severed lizard tail. I swear, no amount of drinking can make you forget that pretty picture. As far as everyone's aware, Faunus have been around as long as mankind, if not a little longer. History gets a little fuzzy past a certain point, but we do know that their kind and ours are completely compatible from a biological standpoint.
Can you do it with a Faunus?
You get a little wolf cub kiddo. A wolf Faunus and a human.
Oh my god, we're going full on detail here about reproduction, are we?
Joy's teething phase could get a little dicey. But if you take a wolf Faunus and a bull Faunus, for example, it's a complete roll of the dice. For all you know, you could be cleaning up your son's shedded snake skin. Ugh. Scientists are still scratching their heads when it comes to, well, a lot about the Faunus. But science isn't the real problem. It's how we all get along. Or in this case, how we don't. Early man was scared to death of the Faunus. And honestly, it's not too hard to sympathize with that. Seeing something that looks like you and acts like you walk out of the forest and reveal a pair of fangs can be a little upsetting. Like most things man doesn't understand, all sorts of rumors and stories surround the Faunus. People avoided them like the plague, pushing them out of settlements and sometimes even hunting them down. Man began to outnumber the Faunus, and the Faunus began to consider man nothing more than a hostile species. Can't really blame them. These clashes between species were unavoidable, as land that was safe from the Grimm was in constant short supply. But it was the Grimm that finally brought humans and Faunus together for the first time. A village in Sanus fell under attack, and the only reason anyone survived was because the humans and Faunus united against their common enemy. It was a step in the right direction, but it didn't fix everything. Once humanity learned they weren't so different from the Faunus, they still used those differences as an excuse to exploit and alienate them. The treatment of the Faunus differed around the world, and things wouldn't improve much for them until the Great War. Veil and Vacuo against Mantle and Mistral, a war unlike anyone had ever seen. And when it was over, the world was desperate to find compromises that would ensure they'd never see the likes of it again. Faunus were awarded equal rights as citizens of Remnant, and as an apology, they were given an entire continent of their own to do with as they pleased. There were some that saw this as fair and just, but many saw it for what it really was, a slap in the face from a nation of sore losers. And so Menagerie was born. There's still Faunus all over the world, though the fair treatment they were promised varies in quality from place to place. But Menagerie will always be their safe haven. Here's the thing, though. You can only push and prod people so much before they reach a tipping point. And when you pack those people together, it just makes it all the easier for them to get organized and get even.
And here you have your old favourite, which we'll be seeing more and more of as we go through the volume. Now, the thing that I was actually thinking about there, as I was listening to that, though, was obviously in Volume 6, when we have the story being told by Jim, Faunus don't actually appear in Remnant, do they, until after the gods have left and humanity is reborn. So it is interesting. It makes me wonder sort of why then. So why were the Faunus not a thing before that? So is there some kind of deep lore here that we're not aware of, or that maybe is told somewhere else that I've just not yet come across? I don't know. It's strange because, you know, there's a lot of questions about, you know, the state of the World of Remnant after the gods, well, just after the gods leave. You know, for example, where dust comes from and what it is and all that. And I suppose the Faunus are kind of another sort of element of that puzzle. And I don't know if has there ever been an explanation for that or a reason for it, why the Faunus would emerge then at that moment. Is it just, you know, another evolutionary path or whatever? But who knows? So yeah, I don't have any answers. I'm just sort of, you know, raising the questions that are on my mind, just coming out of that. Okay, 3, 2, 1, resume. Schnee Dust Company time. So just going to tell us about Weiss's grandfather, possibly, who was a hero.
All right, what was I supposed to talk about next? Oh boy. Yeah, okay. I've got a few words to say about this one. The Schnee Dust Company. Bunch of self-entitled, monopolizing SNOBs who only care about making a profit, no matter how many little people they gotta step on to make it happen. But that's just my opinion. As you all know, our survival in the World of Remnant depends almost entirely on a crystallized substance known as dust. It powers our cities, fuels our machines, and gives us a fighting chance against the creatures of Grimm. Which means it's extremely valuable. Nowadays, it's almost impossible to buy dust products without the Schnee Company snowflake stamped on the box. But it didn't always used to be that way. Nicholas Schnee was the son of a dust miner turned soldier. Born just after the Great War, he found himself at the perfect point in history to take full advantage of the world's next industrial revolution. The Kingdom of Mantle, soon to be Atlas, was in a transformative period. They'd found themselves on the forefront of technology, but realized they depleted nearly all of their natural resources to do so. That's where old Nick came in. Rather than watch his kingdom become dependent on the aid of others, young Nicholas Schnee decided to spend his days at combat school, his nights working alongside his father in the dwindling Mantle mines, and any time in between learning everything he could about anything he didn't know. That kid had a fire in his belly. When his father died, he left his son everything he had. It wasn't much, but it was enough for Nick to set his plan into action.
So is this Weiss's grandfather?
He left school,
I'm
rallied
assuming.
all the men he could afford, and set out on an expedition to find a dust deposit that could revitalize his kingdom. And wouldn't you know, he actually pulled it off. Fast forward just a few years and the name Schnee suddenly meant something. Quality, affordability, trust. See, all those years spent in combat school were so that Nick could personally oversee every new expedition.
Be careful not to
Appreciate a
tap
man
my
who's
wire.
willing to stick his neck out for them. And it's how the Schnee Dust Company earned the business of every kingdom in Remnant. Unfortunately, it's also what led to an early retirement. Nick had started a family that missed him, and his body was tired. Years of working in dust mines can have some nasty side effects on your health. And so enters Jacques Gillet. Having married into the family, Jacques decided to take the Schnee name over his own. He was a lot of words I shouldn't repeat. Most importantly,
He's your favourite
he was
guy.
a cunning businessman. Jacques managed to convince Nicholas that he was the perfect man to run the SDC in his place. And from a certain point of view, he was right. Under Jacques' leadership, the Schnee Dust Company has become more profitable than ever, completely dominating the industry, but at the cost of the company's soul. Cheap labor, dangerous working conditions, doing whatever it takes to destroy the competition. Jacques Schnee doesn't care about people. He cares about winning. That, and making sure he's got the best damn PR team in the world. The Schnee name still means something today, but as for what it'll mean tomorrow, well, your guess is as good as mine.
Not if she has anything to say about it, but yeah. Okay, well, okay, so Nicholas is the grandfather then of Weiss. So he's, because obviously, wait, let me pause, sorry, because we're about to get onto the Great War. Because Volume 9, Weiss has that very iconic line, doesn't she? That she is the granddaughter of a hero, daughter of a villain. So Nicholas is the hero then, basically, the man who saved the kingdom of Atlas's fortunes and built the beginnings of the Schnee Dust Company. I see. Okay, so that's just filled in a couple of little blanks there. Right, let's talk about the Great War now, because of course this gets referred to a lot, certainly in early RWBY. And honestly, I don't really know anything about it, so let's see what this is actually all about. 3, 2, 1, resume.
The Great War. What a terrible name for such a horrible time in history. Though the war itself lasted around 10 years, the century leading up to it was filled with so much tension, you might as well lump them together. And most of that tension was coming from Mistral. Territories rich with resources and safe from Grimm have always been in high demand. But the Emperor of Mistral had managed to conquer nearly all that Anima had to offer, thanks in part to an unlikely friend, Mantle. The two kingdoms had formed an alliance. Mistral provided the small kingdom with goods unavailable in the frozen tundra. In return, Mantle introduced technological innovation as well as guidance in the settlement of Anima's cold, northern territory. It was good, until it wasn't. An incident in Mantle led to a strange and unexpected decree. The abolishment of the arts and repression of self-expression. The people of Mantle had come to believe that they would be much safer from the Grimm if they could simply keep the emotions of the masses in check.
Okay.
Given Mistral's strong, artistic culture, many assumed this would be the end of their alliance. But they were wrong. Mistral complied, selectively, enforcing Mantle's wishes only in the outer territories, allowing the centralized powers to continue to live as they pleased.
Hang on. So, there was a scene in Volume 2, wasn't there, with Ozpin, before Teeth RWBY flew off to Mountain Glen, where he was talking about the Great War, and he said it was a war about culture and art and expression, and said that this is, in the aftermath of that war, that's why everyone in RWBY seems to have a name that is associated with a colour, something like that. Okay, suddenly that feels like it's starting to make sense. What he was actually talking about there, makes sense as in, this suddenly seems to fit very much with that. So, interesting. So it was a war of self-expression as well as a war between nations. Okay, is what I'm guessing. 3, 2, 1, resume.
If you haven't caught on yet, Mistral's full of jerks. The people of Vale had a problem with this. Well, they had a problem with a lot of things Mistral and Mantle had been up to. Treatment of their citizens, use of slave labor, and their constant insistence that their way of life was what was best for everyone. Eventually, Mistral made the jump across the sea to the eastern coast of Faunus. The small islands and peninsulas in the area were perfect to establish a settlement. They were so perfect, in fact, that Vale had just begun settling the area themselves. I think we can all guess what happened next. The King of Vale did everything he could to avoid armed conflict. Despite cries from his people, he insisted on sharing the land with the settlers from Mistral. But to this day, no one knows who shot first.
Well,
But what began as a riot between the two bands of settlers had suddenly become the first battle of the Great War.
I would imagine Salem probably had a hand in that.
Came to Mistral's side. Battles were fought on both Faunus and Anonymous soil. Villages were lost to both combat and Grim. And it wasn't long before Vacuo decided to join the party. Up to this point, Vacuo had done its best to stay out of the fight. Mantle and Mistral, having both already established a small presence in Vacuo territory years before, promised to leave them provided they didn't interfere. Soon, those talks evolved. It went from don't side with them to side with us and you'll be safe. Vacuo did not much care for that. They came to the conclusion that if Vale were to fall, there'd be no one left to stop Mistral and Mantle from conquering them next. So they did what they considered to be the logical thing. They drove Mantle and Mistral out of Vacuo and told Vale they had their backs. I love their style.
Interesting.
So the war raged on. Grim attacks increased worldwide. On the battlefield, this meant a temporary ceasefire in order to deal with the hordes of monsters before returning to the fight at hand. Those left miserable back at home, however, were often helpless with their best warriors away fighting the good fight. A lot of settlements were lost during these years, and most were never reclaimed. Rations on food and dust were put into effect. Development of technology accelerated. Humans and Faunus who fought alongside one another became closer. And every day, mankind grew more and more efficient at destroying itself. But it all ended in the Vacuo campaign. Mistral and Mantle knew that if they could take the dust mines of Vacuo, they would effectively cut off the supply of dust to their enemy. It was to be a final devastating blow to Vale and Vacuo. They were only half right. The King of Vale personally led his army into battle alongside the soldiers of Vacuo and decimated the enemy forces. Crown atop his head and armed only with a sword and his scepter, he laid waste to countless men. As the sand was soaked red with blood, the Grim came in droves. It was the single deadliest battle of the war, and legends of the greatness and terror of the warrior king were born that day. Historians will tell you most of these stories are nothing but grandiose hyperbole. Unusually violent weather conditions, combined with Mantle's unfamiliarity with the desert combat, are likely what led to such a high death count. But whatever the reasoning, everyone bowed to the King of Vale by the time it was over. The Great War had ended. The world was ready to live under the rule of Vale. But the king refused. The leaders of the four kingdoms met on the island of Vital, and it was there they worked together to form a treaty and establish the future of Remnant. Territories were redistributed, slavery was abolished, governments restructured, and the warrior king, the last king Vale would ever have, founded the Huntsman Academies and placed his most trusted followers in command of each kingdom's school.
Sorry, we're taking a pause. So I was, there's something in the back of my mind as I was listening to all of that. Because I've heard fan theories, or, in discussions that Ozpin may very well have been the King of Vale, this king. So, yeah, because the thing that we are soon to get in Volume 4 is a conversation between Oscar and Ozpin. And I'm pretty sure in that conversation, Ozpin mentions the tea set that he gave to Leo, or to at least, whoever the headmaster was at Haven when it was founded. So, yeah. So I guess that's the thing that we pretty much believe to be the case, right? In the lore of RWBY, that Ozpin and the King of Vale, they are one and the same. The King of Vale was one of Ozpin's previous incarnations then, I would imagine, in that case. So, interesting. So, Ozpin played a huge role then, if that's true, in basically reshaping the World of Remnant as to what it is now. But yeah, I would imagine that quite possibly Salem herself probably had a hand in the Great War. I wouldn't be surprised. Oh, sorry. I'm getting hiccups coming up my throat from my cup of tea I was drinking. Right, let's just finish off this last minute and a half. 3, 2, 1, resume.
He would teach the world to fight so long as we promised to fight for ourselves, and never against ourselves. Seems like we haven't kept our end of the bargain.
Oh, never mind. Here's the art department. The most vital member is the one on the left. Well, there you go. So these are all the people then, clearly, who must be involved in the World of Remnant stuff. So is that basically the last World of Remnant, the Great War one? Or is this Team RWBY? Because there is technically a RWBY option at the bottom, and because I click play all, it's probably just run straight into these. Well, I might as well include this here then, ladies and gentlemen, because there's no point in me doing this at the end of the series if it is only about a minute long. Well, here's all your people. Them, in that case. Not picture Jennifer Kennedy and Tony Jimenez. Yeah, they usually include these kind of photo shots. Oh, there we go. It just ended abruptly. Okay, well there you go. There was your World of Remnants and your RWBY photos right there. So I wasn't actually originally planning to have the RWBY stuff involved in that, but we'll include it anyway since it's only short. Okay, right, jump cut here. Let's have some final thoughts in a moment. Right, ladies and gentlemen, there we go. Apologies if the lighting's a little bit off and all that. I'm recording this early in the morning, so the sun is kind of hitting my window at a bit of an angle whereby it feels like sort of this half of my face is a lot darker than the other half, but I'm sure it's not too bad and all that. So I'm sort of sat at a bit of like a weird angle here to try and see if I can get the light to sort of hit my face a bit more, so that way you can actually see me and all that. But that was a good series of little episodes there. And like I say, I'm pretty sure those are the final episodes of World of Remnant that I'm aware of. So basically, if there are any others that I've never seen before, any others that I'm clearly not aware of, then please do let me know. Come on, lighting, what's going on with the webcam then? Yeah, but I think we did learn some interesting stuff there. So, like I say, I think I've always been sort of interested a bit in the geography of Remnant. So, we have the kingdoms thing, which is fine. We know about the 4 kingdoms already from what we've seen across volumes 1 to 9. But the Between Kingdoms one, I think, was particularly interesting as well because, like I say, we often get references in RWBY to how those kingdoms themselves, they have their sort of central cities in which their government and everything is based, but then there's always kind of outlying cities and villages and settlements throughout Remnant in different places. And, we do get references to them every so often. We see, obviously, that, the Shaolong family has its home on Patch, so we see their home, even if we don't see Patch more widely. We see Argus, of course, in Volume 6. We see Mantle in Volume 7 and 8, things like that. And we do see random villages, obviously, for example, in Volume 4 at the moment. So we see things like this, but even then, I think we don't really necessarily have a great sort of sense of the overall geography of the World of Remnant in terms of, where are some of these specific settlements and towns. So that, was an interesting World of Remnant episode to watch about the Between Kingdoms stuff, because it starts to put a few pins on the map here and there. Granted, that's probably not an exhaustive list of every possible location that is referred to in RWBY and all that, but it gives us a sense of where some of them are located anyway. But no, I kind of enjoyed that one. The other interesting one, of course, was, I say the other interesting one, I mean, as though there's only one other, they're all actually interesting, but obviously then we have the Faunus one, and again, obviously I raised that question about the origins of the Faunus, the fact that they only seem to appear after the gods left, and, is there a reason why that was the case? Because like I say, with, when you've got a show like RWBY where, obviously you have magic as being a big sort of element of the plot, dust and things like that, there's always that question of when things appear on the World of Remnant, have they just naturally evolved, or is there some deeper reason why they've appeared? And like I say, I sometimes wonder about dust, for example. I've talked a lot about that before in previous episodes about, the theories about what dust is and how that came to be, the different weird sort of ideas and explanations that have been proposed by different elements of the fandom in previous years. So I suppose there's probably people out there who have similar theories about Faunus and what they are exactly and why they came about. Again, was it just a natural process of evolution? They just came about, randomly? Or was there some deeper process going on there that we don't know about and all that? So that may be a thing, we don't know. And then, of course, we had the SDC episode, so we actually now have a bit of backstory on Weiss's family, and something that provides a bit of context, like say for that iconic Weiss line in Volume 9, granddaughter of a hero, daughter of a villain, and all that. So again, a little bit of information, not much that's particularly new, but interesting nonetheless. And the Great War in particular, I think, was the most interesting one there, because it also gives a lot of context for the history of Remnant, for events that we've heard being referred to in early volumes so far, but which we don't necessarily know a whole lot about. So that was pretty good. I enjoyed those ones overall. Like I say, it feels like they very much filled a load of gaps that I had in my own mind. So now I can say, I know some of the detail that underpins it all. But like I say, there's probably more in some of the supplementary material around RWBY. There may well be other clues here and there that I'm just, not aware of. So as usual, I invite people to leave their comments and things down below with other thoughts that they think I should maybe bear in mind. But no, the other interesting thing actually is that when it talked about Atlas a lot in those particular World of Remnants, about kingdoms and about the Great War, that really gives an interesting window, I think, into people like General Ironwood. I'm going to sort of put that out there right now, because, people in the real world often are, heavily influenced by the cultures and societies in which they grow up and all that. So, that's not to say, we are all just sort of slaves of whatever culture we are born into. People can move between cultures. Culture obviously is very amorphous and it evolves and changes over time. But, and obviously ultimately, people are individual humans and can make individual choices that sometimes go against cultural imperatives or pressures. But like I say, it's always interesting to sort of self-reflect, on the fact that as individuals we grow up in certain societies and cultures, and that has an influence on who we are as individuals. It influences, the values that we hold, the things that we hold dear, the way we think about and conceive of things going on in the world around us. And that affects obviously things like our politics as well, based on, those cultural influences like family, religion, or indeed, moral systems and codes, peers, educational systems. that kind of thing, these all have an influence on who we are as individuals as we grow up. And so, thinking about Atlas then, and thinking about Atlas culture. So again, this is going to be the academic in me talking, because basically in the academic field, when we talk about things like foreign policy and military affairs, there's a discipline known as strategic culture, which is, again, it's all about culture. And it's all about particularly how culture, the culture of particular states, influences things like their foreign policy, or how they conceive of war and strategy and things like this. And so, it's interesting actually to think about applying a strategic cultural lens to fictitious states in RWBY and all that. And like I say, thinking about General Ironwood and the way he behaves and the way he sees the world, you can sort of look at Atlas and its history and think about what kind of a society that was. So that's probably a society that, really prizes innovation and technological advance, and, it's a society that was born out of hardship, in essence. A society that, in its early days, had to really struggle to actually gain a foothold on that northernmost continent. And therefore, probably in order to be able to do that, not only did it need innovation, but also it probably needed, in essence, a degree of discipline and ruthlessness to be able to survive. But also, kind of the paradox of that is that in order to foster innovation, you also need to foster a lot of free thinking. So I imagine that as a society, Atlas, is one that's kind of riven by contradictions internally. Mantle Atlas, to put it that way, since technically they are, part of the same kingdom. But, because like I say, on the one hand, if you're going to overcome crises and things like that, you need a degree of discipline. But you also need a degree of free thinking. And those two things sometimes can bump up against each other. Sometimes they can work very well together, don't get me wrong. But that depends a lot on personality, it depends a lot on the kind of hierarchical structures you've got in society, and are they designed in a way that actually facilitates not just discipline, but also actually at the same time allows for creative thinking and independent thought in a way that enables people to find those innovative solutions. And part of finding innovative solutions sometimes means you have to be able to kind of critique and question things. But that makes it quite interesting when you look at someone like General Ironwood, because certainly he's an individual with a very specific idea of how things should be done. And of course, particularly in volume 7 and 8, there's that whole thing with him being quite authoritarian in his way of doing things, whilst at the same time, he's often, in the early volumes of RWBY, he's sort of kept in check a bit by people like Ozpin and Glinda Goodwitch, who, emphasise to him that, these problems can't all just be solved through rigid authoritarian discipline. You need to countenance other viewpoints. You need to think about other alternate approaches. You need to find that innovative solution. So I suppose, I assume that if you're applying a bit of a strategic cultural lens to Ironwood, then, he's a character who is born in a society that probably has a lot of cultural contradictions in it, and aspects of its culture that don't always necessarily marry up comfortably with one another. But no, like I say, I think it's just interesting when you think of it from that angle. So yeah, that's just something I wasn't actually anticipating talking about that, but the thought sort of occurred to me as I went along. Yeah. Sorry, I feel like I'm getting hiccups threatening to come up again and all that. Okay, well, I think in that case, ladies and gentlemen, we'll sort of wrap up here, because I don't think there's really anything else for me to talk about. I mean, I could sit here and try, talking about the strategic culture of other states in RWBY as well, but then I'll probably find myself here for another 40 minutes or whatever, and I've got a load of other recording stuff that I need to do today, other than just recording RWBY stuff. So yeah, I need to get cracking on with that, really. So yeah, I mean, if you want to keep that conversation going in the comments, then feel free to do so and all that. But other than that, yeah, we'll wrap up here. So we're done, I think, with World of Remnant, unless there are any others that people are about to bring to my attention down below. So thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. Next episode, obviously, we'll be getting to Chapter 7 of Volume 4, continuing on with that. So if I try and remember what happens in Chapter 7, do we have the conversation between Ozpin and Oscar? Possibly, because I feel like that surely needs to be coming up fairly soon, or did come up fairly soon. And on top of that, we may very well have more with Weiss after altercation at the post-concert charity function and all that. So yeah, things to look forward to there, ladies and gentlemen. Alright, John Red Propagandist obviously is my second channel. My main channel is John Red Strategist, where I do a lot of gaming content and all that. Link down below if you're interested. And other than that, thank you once again for joining me, ladies and gentlemen. Leave your comments below, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye, everybody.